Lately, I've been working with a new technique with sharpening freehand, a new approach to it. I've been working with holding the stone in hand and sharpening freely on the stone. Going into it, it seemed harder to do, harder to get good results with, and I like that. I like the challenge of it. The other thing that I thought was, given time, if you could get good at it, you might be able to increase the speed of the whole process. So it might have the promise of efficiency. It's also less to rely on. You're not dealing with a sharpening system, you're not dealing with clamps, you're not even dealing with a table to set things on. You're just holding the stone in one hand, the knife in the other, and going and seeing how well you can do it. I like that aspect of it too, not having to rely on things around you to get it done. Now, the downside of the whole thing is that your angle can be off. It's easier to make a mistake. But at the end of the day, if the knife is a tool, if you're using it as a tool, as long as it's working, as long as it's cutting the way that you want it to, you're going to use it, it's going to dull, you're going to need to resharpen it. So, the other thing that I'm doing with this is I'm working the primary grind of the knife to keep it thin behind the edge bevel. That increases cutting efficiency. It's important if you sharpen a lot. If you sharpen quite often, you'll find, especially with full flat grinds, that the farther you move up towards the spine, the thicker the edge bevel gets, and that slows down cutting efficiency. Really, if you want a knife to perform well at cutting tasks, you want it as thin as possible, given the task that you're gonna use it for. So, a thin knife with a low apex angle will work best. So, I've been working on this almost daily. I've been doing this sharpening, and I've been having good results with it. Mostly what I've used is this Opinel number 9. It's a carbon Opinel, so the steel is XC90. It's a low wear resistant steel. I'll sharpen the knife, and within a day I'll dull it, either in general use, or I'll sit down with cardboard and cut it and cut it and cut it until the knife is dull, and then I'll sharpen it again. And it's good practice. And Opinel's it's a good knife for learning new techniques with, trying new things, trying to perfect things. It's got good ergonomics, so if you need to use the knife to wear it down, to sharpen it again, it's good for that. It's an interesting design that's been around for a long time. There's some guys love Opinels and some guys hate them, and they're not really there to replace your Spydercos and Benchmades and ZTs, but it's a nice addition to what you're using, especially if you're sharpening. So I've been working with this mostly, a couple kitchen knives in there as well, finding good results with everything that I'm using. But I wanted to test the whole thing just to make sure that I wasn't making some inherent mistake in the way that I was executing the technique. So I decided to test it. This is also an Opinel number 9, also carbon steel. This is usually what I would carry if I was going to be carrying an Opinel. This knife also, I thinned out the bevel on this knife as well. I thinned out the bevel, I patinaed the blade, I polished down near the edge bevel, cut a new bevel into it, and sharpened it to 30 inclusive. I've had this for quite a while. Both knives, this has been sharpened, been sitting for a while. This one had been sitting for a few days. Both of them ready to go, both of them very sharp. You always test with freshly sharpened steel. You don't want fatigued steel on the edge if you're going to be judging the performance of the steel. So I didn't resharpen the knives for the test. Both were very sharp. They were both ready to go. Neither one had been used for anything. What I did do was, before the test, I did strop both knives. just to make sure there wasn't any corrosion on the edge, and just to give them a finishing point that was the same. I don't even remember what I finished this one on. It was probably 1/10 of a micron. This one, I've been finishing it on strops. I haven't even been looking at what I've been using. Anything, if there was a piece of basswood laying around the bench with compound on it, I would just grab it and work on that and jump to another one. And I was getting, the results I was getting were just fine from that. So I went ahead and stropped both of these tonight. I started on 1/2 micron on wood. I worked my way through that and then moved on to a 1/4 micron on leather, 0.05 micron on leather, and then finished with a 0.025 micron on leather. The test was cutting cardboard. It was push cutting. I marked off both blades so I knew what section I was using. The cardboard was fairly heavy. I wanted to keep the test short. I wasn't trying to get an exact result with this. Again, I was just looking for to see if this one had a terrible deficit in performance that I could attribute to the way that I was sharpening the knife. So the test was on cardboard. I worked my way through the test. Both knives stopped at around the same point. I mean, they both stopped around the same time. It was a little over 100 inches, about 115 inches of cardboard cut by both knives for them to stop shaving hair. And what was interesting was, so okay, fine. That was the test. I only did one run. I just wanted to see that there wasn't a huge problem in performance, and there wasn't. I measured both knives on the primary grind before the test with calipers, and I was surprised. This one measured between 0.2 and 0.35 millimeters up the blade. That's pretty thin. You know, if you're talking 0.2 millimeters, it's 1/5 of a millimeter. It's really thin behind the edge bevel. I expected this one to be extremely thin as well, and it measured 0.4 to 0.5 millimeters, which surprised me at first given how much I've worked this primary grind. And then I thought about it, and I thought about how much I've been sharpening it. It's been sharpened many more times than this one. So I'm moving farther up the blade towards the spine, so it would get thicker. I mean, it makes sense that it would be thicker. What was interesting was in the test, I could feel it. I noticed it in the cutting. This one was, it was an obvious difference in how easily this one cut, as opposed to the thicker blade. I thought that was interesting. Also, you could look at it and say maybe the finish had something to do with it. I mean, this is at a high polish. This one I'm working the primary grind on a 250 grit King Waterstone, so it's a fairly rough finish on the blade. So that the test answered what I wanted it to answer. After that, I needed to resharpen both knives. I started with this one, and I started on the stones from the Spyderco Sharpmaker. I started on the diamond stones, and I used the old stones. I didn't need the edge to be overly aggressive, and this steel doesn't put up that much of a fight to sharpening. So I used the old diamond stones. They're smoother, but it wouldn't. I didn't think it would be an issue, and it wouldn't. It wasn't. Apex the knife. After that, I moved on to the medium stones, jumping to the new stones at this point. I worked with the medium. After that, I moved on to fine, and then ultra fine. After the Sharpmaker stones, I moved on to strops. I started with a 3 to 5 micron on basswood, then moved to a 1 micron, then a 1/2 micron. Now, at that point, the knife was plenty sharp enough. I could have stopped there, but I went ahead and kept going. Part of the reason I kept going was I was using these strops with leather and compound. It's the 1/4 micron, 0.05 micron, and 0.025 micron diamond sprays, and I'm trying them with a new kind of leather on those strops. So it was just use of the strops with a new kind of leather and those sprays just to see how they would do. When all was done, the result that I had was the one that I wanted. The knife was extremely sharp and cutting the way that I wanted it to. After that, I moved on to this knife. I started with a DMT coarse diamond plate. I used it wet. The plate apexed the knife just fine. Took the wear out of the knife. And after I was done the test, I mean, I was using a small section of the knife for the test, and after I was done that cutting, I took all the tape off the blades. I continued cutting just to put wear on each knife over the entire blade. DMT plate, the coarse plate, took that out. It wasn't a problem. After the coarse plate, I moved on to a double-sided plate, smaller one. Started with fine, again using it with water. Worked my way through that, and then I moved on to the extra fine side. I worked with that. When that was done, I moved on to an ultra fine ceramic bench stone from Spyderco. I used that dry. I worked my way through that stone, and when that was done, I moved on to a 12,000 grit Shapton ceramic water stone. I worked with that. Wasn't any problems there, and when I was done with that, I worked the primary grind of the knife. Again, I was using a 250 grit King water stone. I like the finish that it leaves in contrast to the edge bevel. I've played around with different water stones working the primary grind, but the 250 grit is really the one that I prefer. So when the primary grind was how I wanted it to be, I went back to the Shapton and did some finishing strokes just for burr removal and to make sure the edge was where I wanted it after the use on the water stone. After the Shapton, I moved on to strops. I started with a 3 to 5 micron on basswood. The next compound I used, I'm not even sure what it is. Probably a 2 micron or a 1.5 micron. After that, I believe I moved on to a 1 micron, again on wood. And then after that, I moved on to a half micron on wood. I finished with a 1/4 micron on leather. I didn't take it farther than that. The knife is going to be resharpened soon anyway. I mean, within the next 24 hours probably I'll blunt the knife using it, and then I'll sharpen it again. But after the 1/4 micron compound, the result that I got was the one that I wanted. It was easily cutting free hanging hairs up the entire course of the blade. So, different technique. I think that it's interesting. I haven't tried it on any high carbide steels yet, but I think that that's where this is going.